Thomas Aquinas formulated his 5 arguments for God's existence in his magnum opus, Summa Theologica. These became known today as the 5 Ways, and I'm going to examine the first 3 ways of these arguments, collectively known as the Thomist cosmological arguments. What makes these arguments so compelling, even 8 centuries later? At their core, they each attempt to prove God's existence not through religious texts or divine revelation, but through observations about the natural world and application of reason. As philosopher Edward Feser puts it, Aquinas' 5 Ways are not, as it is often supposed, merely fallacious attempts to show that the universe must have had a beginning. They're about why things exist at all at this moment and why they persist in existence. Aquinas' first way is the argument from motion, or more technically, the argument from change. Here's how Aquinas himself formulated it. It is certain and evident to our senses that in the world some things are in motion. Now whatever is in motion is put in motion by another, and this cannot go on to infinity, because then there would be no first mover and consequently no other mover. Seeing that subsequent movers move only inasmuch as they are put in motion by the first mover, therefore it is necessary to arrive at a first mover, put in motion by no other, and this everyone understands to be God. Now, let's break this down. Aquinas isn't merely talking about physical motion like a car driving down the street. He's pointing out what philosophers call potentiality becoming actuality. Consider an acorn. It has the potential to become an oak tree, but it cannot actualize this potential on its own. It requires soil, water, sunlight, and proper temperature. Something already in actuality must act upon it. Aquinas argues that this principle applies universally. Nothing can change from potentiality to actuality without something already in actuality causing that change, and this cannot continue infinitely backward in a chain of causes, or nothing would ever actually change. Therefore, there must be a first cause of change, a prime mover, that is unmoved or unchanging. Not everyone finds this argument convincing. Let's examine some objections. Now, if you've watched my latest Cosmological video, you will know I speak heavily on the infinite regress theory, and it is probably the most common objection. It goes as follows. Why can't there be an infinite chain of movers? Why must this chain terminate? Bertrand Russell articulated this criticism. If everything must have a cause, then God must have a cause. If there can be anything without a cause, it may as well just be the world as God. But this misunderstands Aquinas' argument. Aquinas isn't saying that everything has a cause. He's saying that everything that changes from potentiality to actuality requires a cause, already in actuality. Furthermore, Aquinas distinguishes between accidentally ordered causal series and essentially ordered causal series. The first way concerns essentially ordered series, where the later members have no causal power except as instruments of the first. Think of a stick moving a stone. The stone is moved by the stick, which is moved by the hand, which is moved by the muscles, which are moved by the nerve impulses, and so on. The stick in and of itself has no power to move anything unless it's being moved by the hand. Philosopher Edward Feser defends Aquinas here. The series of causes Aquinas has in mind are ordered per se, or essentially, where the later members of the series have no power to cause anything on their own, but derive all their causal power from the first member, which must therefore exist here and now as long as the series exists. Modern philosopher William Lane Craig adds, what Aquinas is arguing is that if there's no first cause, then there is no intermediate cause, but there are intermediate causes, therefore there must be a first cause. The second way builds upon similar principles but focuses on efficient causation rather than motion or change. Here's Aquinas in his own words. In the world of sense, we find there is an order of efficient causes. There is no known case, neither is it indeed possible, in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself, for it would have to be prior to itself, which is impossible. Now, to take away the cause is to take away the effect. Therefore, if there be no first cause among efficient causes, there will be no ultimate nor any intermediate cause. Therefore, it is necessary to admit a first efficient cause, to which everyone gives the name of God. Now, let's unpack this. An efficient cause is that which brings something into existence. For example, a sculptor is the efficient cause of a statue. Aquinas notes that nothing can be the efficient cause of itself, because that would mean it existed before it existed, which is logically impossible. Just as with the first way, he argues that a chain of efficient causes cannot extend backwards, or nothing would exist now. Therefore, there must be a first efficient cause that is uncaused. Some argue that modern quantum mechanics has shown that effects can occur without causes, such as in radioactive decay or virtual particle formation. As physicist Sean Carroll puts it, the causality we observe in the everyday world is an approximate, emergent phenomenon, not a fundamental feature of reality. Others point to modern cosmological theory suggesting that the universe may be self-explaining. Stephen Hawking famously wrote, "Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing, why the universe exists." Defenders of Aquinas argue that these objections misunderstand the second way's metaphysical nature. Here's a brilliant quote from William Lane Craig. "Quantum events may not have deterministic causes, but they still have probabilistic causes, which is why quantum mechanics is such a powerful theory." As for the self-causing universe objection, Thomist responds that Aquinas' argument isn't about temporal beginnings, but ontological dependence in the present moment. Philosopher Edward Feser clarifies, Aquinas is not asking what caused the universe to come into existence, but rather what causes the universe to exist at all, right now. The third way differs slightly from the first two. Rather than focusing on motion or efficient causation, it centers on contingency and necessity. Here's how Aquinas formulated it. "We find in nature things that are possible to be and not to be, since they are found to be generated. But it is impossible for these to always exist, for that which is possible not to be at some time cannot possibly always exist. Therefore, if everything is possible not to be, then at one time there could have been nothing in existence. But if this were true, even now there would be nothing in existence, because that which does not exist only begins to exist by something already existing. Therefore, not all beings are merely possible, but there must exist something the existence of which is necessary." This is perhaps the most intricate of Aquinas' arguments. Let's carefully dissect it. Aquinas begins by observing that many things in our experience are contingent, and they come into and go out of existence. You and I are contingent beings. We were born at some point and we will eventually die. Aquinas argues that if everything were contingent, then there's a possible scenario where nothing exists. But if true nothingness were ever the case, nothing would exist now, since something cannot come from nothing. Therefore, Aquinas concludes there must be at least one necessary being, something that cannot not exist, something whose essence is to exist, and this necessary being he identifies as God. Some argue that the universe itself, or its fundamental constituents like matter or energy, might be the necessary being Aquinas seeks. Philosopher Quinton Smith writes, "The universe exists by a necessity of its own nature because it contains within itself the sufficient reason for its existence." Other people argue that Aquinas commits a modal fallacy, confusing the statement, "it is possible that all contingent beings do not exist simultaneously," with, "it is possible for there to be nothing." These are not logically equivalent statements. While each contingent thing might not exist, that doesn't mean all contingent things could fail to exist simultaneously. Defenders of Aquinas offer several responses to these objections. The universe cannot be the necessary being Aquinas speaks of because the universe is composite and changeable, whereas a necessary being must be simple and unchangeable. Regarding the modal fallacy objection, Thomist points out that Aquinas is not making a simple logical error. He's arguing that contingent beings require explanation, and any adequate explanation must ultimately trace back to a necessary being. The first three Thomistic ways share important elements. They all argue from observed features in the world, motion, causation, and contingency, to the existence of something beyond the world that explains these features. For Aquinas, these arguments don't merely establish some abstract philosophical principle. Each points to what classical theists understand as God, a being that is unmoved, uncaused, and necessary. In spite of the fact that Aquinas on his deathbed, refuted his entire life's work because of some sort of religious experience or whatever, it doesn't mean that these arguments are flawed. They're still great arguments, even if Aquinas himself didn't like them at the end of his life. Anyways, that's the end of this video. If you enjoyed, leave a like if you want, and yeah, I'll see you on the next one. Actually, I'm just gonna let you guys know the next video is possibly gonna be about the history of the Israelites and their military conquests based on the Old Testament. So if you're looking for some high quality content, subscribe. It'll probably be out in the next week or so. But on that note, I'll see you in the next one.